Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Wild Tales. I am your host, Mike Bona, and I'm excited to share my conversation with Bob Cisneros, a true legend in the world of wildlife care and conservation. Bob has had an incredible background from working as an animal keeper at the world-famous San Diego Zoo to serving as the director of the Utah Hogle Zoo, and now as a USA board member for Action for Cheetahs in Kenya. In this episode, Bob shares a fascinating story about his time at the San Diego Zoo, where he successfully hand-raised one of the most elusive and endangered animals in the world. Can you guess what it is? You'll soon find out. We had a wonderful yet lengthy conversation, and unfortunately, I could not fit everything in this podcast. If you would like to hear the full unedited version, feel free to send me an email at wildtalespod@gmail.com. I'd be happy to share with you the unedited version. Our conversation started well before what you'll hear at the beginning of this episode, but I did decide to start here because Bob was talking about why he enjoyed the Wild Tales podcast so much, and I couldn't leave that part out. Now let's dive into Bob's incredible story.
And this is the part that I love about your emphasis, is that storytelling is really important. Especially in our field, because of the generation differences that we have between old school keepers and the new field coming in. Storytelling is part of the inspiration that also shares not just experiences, but also problem-solving methods and helps to inspire younger keepers. And so I really salute you for doing this, because it gives keepers a different perspective than just meeting their day-to-day needs.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel the same thing. And that's kind of what inspired this podcast. It's just to invite, friends and conservationists and other people from all over to come and tell their animal-based stories. And I know you have so many in your career as a keeper and a curator and a director and all your animal experience that I look forward to hearing what you have to say today.
Well, I'll probably dwell on some of the things you're familiar with, but the great part about a podcast is it's extemporaneous, so anything could come up. I do want to share something with you, though, as I was listening to the Giraffe Conservation Foundation podcast, and the question came out, how smart is a giraffe? And years ago in the early 90s, I had the privilege of being late lockup for night zoo. So we had guests out on the grounds. It was not common to do that back in the 90s. So San Diego was just starting to open up the zoo for guests at night. And my job throughout the evening was to check on all the animals, bring the animals in at night. And I had a bit of time after bringing the giraffes in, so I thought I'll go out and rake his yard for him. So when the keeper comes in, his yard will be raked and there'll be a wheelbarrow full of cow dung, or rather giraffe dung on, right outside the gate. So he would call me the next day and say, don't go to anybody else. Let's just spend an hour working together and I'll teach you everything. And he said, people think giraffes are dumb, but I will tell you, giraffes are as smart as they need to be. And that makes all the difference in the world. And I started thinking about it and I thought, that makes sense. It's like they've trained to be giraffes all their lives. And if you took a swimmer, an Olympic swimmer, and threw them on an Olympic wrestling mat, they're trained to be swimmers all their lives, but they're just going to be a fish out of water, no pun intended, on the wrestling mat, because different skill sets are required and are acquired during that training process. So it gave me a unique perspective about working with the animals, whichever ones I worked with, that they are as smart as they need to be. And then you just have to figure out what nature requires, what aspect of knowledge in order to be successful.
Great point. Yeah, like Julian said in that podcast, they've been around for millions more years than humans have. So they are doing something right. And you're right. They're just as smart as a giraffe needs to be to survive this long. So you have some exciting stories to share with us today? Or a story?
No. I think I'll go back to the story that you're familiar with, which is Baba the Pangolin. Back in, 2007, San Diego received some pangolins, and one of the greatest challenges was they had been imported from Africa. These are tree pangolins. They've been imported from Africa, but they, even though San Diego had required them to be transitioned on a zoo-based diet, it actually didn't happen. And so they had one pangolin in particular that, in order to keep him stable, he had to be completely tube fed every day, 2 times, 3 times a day. And they had tried, the hospital crew had tried everything to try and acclimate this guy to eating a dew-based diet, which is an insectivore diet in sort of a slurry. And in the wild, pangolins eat termites and ants. And they tried live insects, they tried everything, and they just couldn't do it. And so every day this guy was getting tube fed 2, 3 times a day. They tried tough love, meaning they cut back on his food, thought maybe if he was hungry enough, he would, go for the bowl of gruel that was sitting in the exhibit. And nothing seemed to work. And it was getting to a point where they felt that the invasive measures to maintain his life were in conflict with quality of life. And so I'd been a hospital keeper for 9 years, and, tube feeding was one of the things that we did periodically when it was necessary. And so I came up from Children's Zoo. I had transferred from the hospital to become a lead keeper at the Children's Zoo, and they had asked us to keep the 2 pangolins down there. We had a female, Baka, and a male, Baba. And Baba was the one that had the eating difficulties. And so they asked us to take them down. We got a nice temperature and humidity controlled room set up. And I came up to the hospital for a minimum of 3 training sessions on doing the tube feeding. And I thought, you know what, I'm just going to go up every day and do this for a minimum of 10 times, just so that I make sure that I get this right. One of the things that I noticed when we were doing the tube feeding was that he never fought. And maybe this was his, response after a period of time of just accepting this. But he suckled. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. So when he came down from the hospital, they'd asked us to reduce his food. And this is going to sound a little harsh, but it was the reality of the situation. And we were trying to do everything that we could to determine at what point we would be able to transition this guy. So he went from 2,000 grams to 1,500 grams. So lost a significant amount of weight. And I thought, well, maybe we need to change our plan a little bit. And so I got a curved syringe instead of a tube. And I thought, a curved tip syringe, maybe I can just put in the side of his mouth and just kind of gently squeeze and see what he does. And that didn't seem to work. I went to the nursery keepers who, like your nursery keepers at LA, have an amazing background in caring for neonates and of all different species. And so I asked, I need a nipple that is about the length and width of my finger. And they pulled out a marsupial nipple. We got that. We set it up, put it in his mouth, and he started suckling. And so I was able to gently squeeze it. So now I wasn't tube feeding him. I was assisted feeding. So I thought, well, I'm going to have to make sure that I get approval. So I went to the vets the next day, and because I'd been a hospital keeper for many years there, I had a really good relationship. So I went to the vet and I said, I have this friend who has this pangolin, and then
We all have friends that have pangolins.
Yeah, and started the story that way. And I explained where I was, and I said, considering that I don't have I want to change the diet somewhat. Can I add some Ensure to this just to beef up the calories? And so we talked about it for a bit. And so I went back, I changed the recipe. And then from there, I figured out a way to approximate going from a nipple-tipped syringe to finally getting him to eat out of a bowl. And it took place in about 3 weeks from being tube-fed to complete independence. And it all came down to taking that syringe, putting it inside a silicone funnel. So the tip was sticking through the inside of the funnel, getting him used to that, smearing it around the inside of the funnel, and then from there, putting that funnel into a bowl, getting him used to coming in to eat out of the funnel, going into the bowl, and then finally, when his weight was back up to 2,000 grams, getting him to eat independently out of that bowl. I maintained a very, very small amount of vanilla and Sure in his mix, even though he didn't need it anymore. And what I found was, although the female didn't eat till later afternoon, he still beelined for his food because it smelled exactly the way his food has always smelled. And so I was able to maintain 2 pangolins in the same enclosure and feed them at the same time and never have to worry about Baba going over to his, eating his dish, then going over to hers and eating hers. And so he ended up living another 7 years or so after that, became an ambassador. And I remember going to an AZA conference and running into one of the nutritionists there who had just found out what we had accomplished. And he said, "You realize that we now have removed the moratorium on importing pangolins because of your success." And so today, Brookfield is a great example of, a very successful organization that has had great success with not only carrying and exhibiting pangolins, but also breeding. And that's huge because, as you know, the pangolin crisis for poaching and smuggling is pretty dire. And for some reason, there's still belief that those scales have some kind of medicinal purposes.
Yeah, they're the most trafficked mammal on the planet. If we just backtrack just a second for anyone listening that may not know what a pangolin is, how would you describe a pangolin to someone that's never seen one?
The common name is the scaly anteater. It's got a prehensile tail. It's bitchin' because the tip of the tail looks like a fingertip. And so it's nocturnal. There are 8 species, 4 in Asia, 4 in Africa. The one that probably most people are familiar with is the giant pangolin, which is land-based. But they have this amazing tongue, an incredible sense of smell, and these strong claws that are able to pull apart rotted trees and termite mounds. So if you think about an anteater, then you throw a bunch of guitar picks on it, then you basically have a pangolin, or a tamandua is another way to describe it. I brought Baba out years ago for a VIP encounter with Peter Frampton, who was a guitarist and musician during my era. And he looked at me and said, "What are those?" And I said, "Well, it's keratin." And I looked at his wife. I said, "It's like having 1,000 Lee press-on nails, the fake fingernails that they used to sell in the stores." And I looked at him and I said, "Or 1,000 medium gauge guitar picks."
Description. I've never heard anyone describe that as guitar picks, but yeah, that's kind of what they look like.
And what's really amazing is, watching these guys. We successfully housed a male and a female. And when we'd come in with warm water spray and hose them down in their little burrow. And the female would come over and she would groom the male. And like Venetian blinds, their scales would open up. And then her tongue would dart back and forth. And I'm sure that, they look for parasites or anything else. But, just watching these guys, it truly was an unforgettable moment in my career where I felt really, really connected with an animal. And then when you bring him out to the public and you talk about all of the different things, we were able to bring him out to the news. And because of his adjustment with his diet, we could bring him out on the perch and take his gruel and just slide it on the perch, and he would, you could see the tongue work going. And it made for a fantastic story, not just the background story of Baba himself, but also the connection of introducing people to an animal species they have never seen up close and personal.
Yeah, they're amazing. I'm sure it was very, kind of awe-inspiring for one, especially if never seen a pangolin, probably walked into the zoo to this encounter and never even heard of a pangolin, to see the alien-looking creature with all these little guitar picks down its back. I'm sure that really is an attention getter, and it's really special thing that you can share at the zoo.
And it's great when we have these little milestones that allow other people to feel comfortable at, not feeling like they have to take huge risk. And, with animal care, it's like we take inherent risks every day when it comes to working with animals. There are areas of predictability, and then there are areas of where we have no predictable basis. And so taking that risk out of working with pangolins, enabled Brookfield to really thrive at what they're doing. And, and I hope that that's an inspiration for other people to look at a couple of things. One, our observation skills as zookeepers, those skills are really, really important. And it's not just focusing on what we need to get done. It's looking at everything and trying to problem solve, and, having that outside awareness of what an animal is doing, and being able to solve whatever issues you need to solve. So I think for me, I felt it was a momentous occasion for me, because I felt like problem solving 101 had become fulfilled.
Has made a huge difference to this day. For the zoos that have pangolins are learning from your experience and your care of that particular pangolin.
And we thought we not to sound morbid about it, but we didn't have a lot of hope for Baba, and he basically was, destined for palliative care at the children's zoo. We didn't really have an idea that there was going to be such a long-term relationship with him. And, it's one of the things that I think as zookeepers, we offer hope, right, to our guests. We offer hope for a better world, for a place where animals and humans can thrive together and with shared resources. But amongst each other, our coworkers and our peers, we also offer that hope with shared knowledge. And that was one of the things when I was president of AZK National. That was a really important part of my focus there, was how do we get keepers to not only share knowledge, but also gain knowledge from a fundamental perspective. And today's conference schedule is a testament to that focus, where it's not a lot of, it used to be you'd go to an AZAC conference, American Association of Zookeepers, and there would be 50 papers and maybe 4 workshops. And we decided that it was time for us to really validate the amount of learning that could take place in a conference setting. San Diego was the very first place that we did in 2011, where we, instead of 5 workshops, we put on 25 workshops. And they were all husbandry-based, problem-solving, conservation. It was just about every aspect of zookeeping you could think of. And AAZK has continued with that format. They provided some more contemporary twists to it, but the focus is how do we maintain a program where keepers can constantly learn plus share.
Yeah, it's amazing. I've been to a few conferences, and there's just keepers from all over the country, even from outside the country, that attend. There's hundreds of keepers, and there's such niche topics that may only relate to like a small handful of attendees, but those are important topics that can go a long way for those few keepers that can learn from that information and take that experience home to their zoos. that can really benefit the lives and the longevity of the animals they care for.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is just meeting with keepers in person and finding out that whatever challenges they have at their institution, there are challenges all over, and it's great to hear how other people respond to those challenges. We've all worked over the years with different types of conditions where we thought, oh God, maybe I need to go someplace else, and then you find out this is how it happens, across the board. But here are how other people respond to it. I remember being at a workshop and somebody was complaining about, every time we want to do a fundraiser at our zoo, the zoo says no, and we can't do it. And so I suggested and said, why don't you meet with your development group and say, we'll lay the foundation for this. We'll work out all the kinks. We'll do this for 2 years, and then we'll give it to you. And then you can do it. If it's successful, you can do it. And, we did that a couple of times at San Diego, and that seemed to be, really successful. But keepers and the upper echelon, we're all benign collaborators. We work for a common goal of having, one, a successful zoo, that's primary, but two, the mission, which is connecting people to wildlife and helping to save wildlife in wild places. So I think the collaborative effort of zookeepers is a very important function in the success of organizations. And I'm glad to see that more and more organizations are really emphasizing sending zookeepers to conferences. A shout out to Hogle. The professional development at Hogle Zoo emphasized sending keepers to AAZK, to ABMA, to a number of different conferences and workshops, because they recognized that, one, it was great for morale, but two, it allowed two things. One, for keepers at Hogle to present, to show people what we do, but also two, to give them an opportunity for broad-based learning through interactions with other keepers.
Yeah, I think you meet these keepers, you discover we all have similar problems that, with our animals and our zoos, but sometimes it gives you an opportunity to look at it from a different perspective to solve any problems you have on how to care for a certain species.
And this as well as I do, that a lot of the problems that are faced by young keepers today are no different than the ones that we encountered, back in the 90s and, when these guys were still in diapers. So nothing has really changed, although it's just wearing a different color. And the zoo field is, looking at a lot of different problem solving techniques for staff development and morale. But I wanted to share something with you, and I'm not sure if you ever saw this. This is a great perspective piece. It was written in the 90s, and there was an article in the Animal Keepers Forum, which is the publication for the American Association of Zookeepers, and it was posted in our mammal office at San Diego. That's where I first ran into it, because the publication actually probably came out before I was a member. And it's a little bit long, but bear with me on this, and I'll try and edit as I go along. But it really talks about dealing with challenges and frustrations. And this is in the 90s. And you take that, you read it today, and it still rings true. And what this author says is, working in a zoo is an extremely physically demanding job that requires self-discipline, self-motivation, and independent thinking. It is good, honest, hard work that provides the opportunities for direct and indirect animal interactions. The satisfaction in knowing that due to my actions, a difference has been made for the better in an animal's quality of life allows me to sleep very well at night. Unfortunately, the reality of any profession is that there are always factors that interfere with the accomplishments and satisfactions of the day-to-day job. Zookeeping is no exception. I have seen too many good, motivated, idealistic, dedicated, and professional keepers become dissatisfied, unmotivated and disgruntled due to the inherent politics of different institutions. Perhaps if everyone took the time in their daily routine to foster the wonder, then maybe positive attitudes would be more prevalent. I am acutely aware that sometimes it is difficult to focus on the positive, but it is those times I remind myself how lucky I am. I may not be bringing home a large paycheck, but there are parts of my job that I would gladly do for free. I'm empowered by my chosen profession and am a respected member of the community. I remembered why I stay in this field for many years and vow never to take any of it for granted again. And here's the kicker. As professionals, we must accept the things we cannot change, but work to change the things we can. We must all start within ourselves, for our attitude affects all those around us. Life is too short, and this job is too demanding not to be proud of what we do. The challenge is to find a way to focus all the negative energy into a positive and constructive manner. Take time to foster the wonder. It is the single most important step in keeping the faith.
What's amazing about that is you said it was written 30 years ago, and that could have been written today and still have the same impact.
Absolutely. And I've been a member of a Facebook keeper-based Facebook page since it first started. And I never post anything on there, and I allow them to, interact at their levels. But I do feel like this is something I would love to share with those guys and just say, this is what we're dealing with is no different today. And it's true when every now and then you encounter some quote about the younger generation being disrespectful and the younger generation doing this. And then you find out it was written in 1850.
Yeah.
So I think the challenges, like I said, may wear a different coat, but they're still pretty much based off the same thing. And
there are challenges, but it's important to take pride in the work we do, and we do some great work. We got into this field for a reason. We want to make a difference in the lives of the animals we care for and their counterparts out in the wild, to educate and to participate in conservation. And I'm proud of my colleagues that, come in day after day and still believe in that.
Who gets to do this? I mean, that's when I would go to high school reunions and, I start talking to people about what I do and or they would, everybody looks up everyone. It really does demonstrate how fortunate we are, even though we have the calluses, the sore backs, a fairly, what I would consider an imbalanced work-life relationship. We still get to do some pretty amazing things and work with some amazing animals that a lot of people will never see in their lifetime. And our goal is to provide an opportunity for them to see it, but also to protect those guys out in the wild. I think the other thing, and I learned this at Children's Zoo, because every walking moment was an interaction at the CZ. And I thought, this is the opportunity to inspire, to get kids really excited. And I'll share a story with you. My wife, who is also retired, was an attorney for many, many years, and she did construction defect litigation. And she had an expert witness that she called on many times, and they had a pretty good professional relationship. And we had still do have an old craftsman in San Diego, and we needed our foundation looked at. So we called Pete. Pete came to look at the foundation, gave us some ideas of what we could do. And when we tried to pay him, he said, nah, this is on me. So I thought, talking to my wife, well, let's do something nice for Pete and his family. Let me get some zoo passes. I'll meet up with them. I'll give them a tour around the zoo. And then I'll throw in something at the very end. And so I walked Pete and his family around the zoo, talked about all the animals that I'd worked with and different things about my career, and it in relationship to a lot of the individual stories of the animals and their counterparts in the wild. And at the very end, I surprised them with a cheetah encounter at Hunt Amphitheater. And they had a family picture taken with this cheetah and a golden retriever. And fast forward years later, as AZAC president, I put on a fundraiser for Lori Marker who is the director of the Cheetah Conservation Fund at Joan Embry's ranch. And so as people were coming in, I was at the welcome table, and I pretty much thought I knew everyone who was coming to this event. And there's Pete. I'm like, Pete, what are you doing here? And he said, well, funny you should ask. Do you remember that tour that you gave us? I said, yeah, I remember that. And he said, well, my daughter was in high school, and when she had to write her entrance essay was about her tour with you and all of the stories that you had and all of your encounters and different animals that we saw and all of their unique adaptations. But that's not the real reason why I'm here. The real reason why is because when you took us down to Hunt Amphitheater and we saw that cheetah, my daughter was so connected with that she went on to study conservation biology and then went to Namibia to work with Lori Marker. And that's why I'm here. She then went on to get a PhD in conservation biology and emphasizing what she did a lot of lion research in Africa and is now a chief scientist at San Diego Zoo's Conservation Research Institute. Who knew, right? Who knew that a moment like that could have an impact on somebody? And that's why I think that, as zookeepers and zoo professionals, everything that we can do to create those magical moments has some type of seed that can sprout into some magnificent tree.
You never know. And that's the important thing to keep in mind is whenever you have to give, as a zookeeper, have to give a talk or a presentation. So even if it's at the end of the day, if you're tired, if you had a rough day, you got to remember that you might be inspiring the future generation of conservationists, of zookeepers, because all of us that are in the animal field had that person most likely at a young age that inspired us to get into the field that we're in.
So those are the things I think for me that I look back on, and I think as a zookeeper, I had some amazing opportunities.
Totally agree. There's keepers all over the world doing amazing things, and it's always amazing when you can learn from those experiences. So thank you, Bob, for coming on. I feel like we could just sit down and chat. I wish I was closer to you. I'd come over and we could chat all day about zookeeping, but
well, I'll tell you, we have an open house policy. So if you find yourself out in this area, if for any reason, I'm about an hour from Blank Park Zoo. So if you find yourself headed to Blank Park, just look me up, come over, spend the night. I will feed you fat.
I appreciate the invite. If I'm ever in Iowa, I will take you up, but you enjoy your nice, big, spacious house. I still have the ocean, so I will enjoy that. I'll take what I can get.
I miss the oceans. I miss the mountains.
Yeah.
But, I was a military brat, so we moved all over the place and we just adjust to wherever we're living. Anyway, yeah, I'm the same way. I could talk to you forever. And don't be a stranger, just if you have a moment. And I'm always happy to be a thought partner. That's the one thing that I will say out there is that anybody have any ideas that they just want to run by me, I'm happy to be a thought partner on it.
I will keep that in mind. I'll stay in touch and reach out to you from time to time. Thanks, Bob.
Sounds good.
Big thanks to Bob for coming on the podcast. I had a great conversation with him, and I look forward to having him on in the future. In the meantime, for everyone else, this is the last podcast before Christmas. We are in the midst of the holiday season. If you would like to do something nice for me, all I ask for is please share this podcast with someone you think might enjoy it, and maybe give it a review. 5 stars would be nice. 4 I would take. No, you know what? On second thought, let's make it all 5 stars. I would love to hear from you. Like and follow on the Instagram and Blue Sky. All the links are in the show description. And send me an email if you have any words of encouragement, any nice things you want to say, any mean things you want to say, any stories you want to tell. Maybe you can be one of my guests in the future. My email is wildtalespod@gmail.com. That's Tails, Tails. Thank you all for listening, and until next time, stay wild, my friends.